10-minute murder.
Slumped in the corner of an interrogation room, Josh Powell provides little information about the possible whereabouts of his wife and the mother of his children, reported missing 24 hours prior. By Josh's account, he'd taken their boys camping at midnight in the sub-zero Utah temperatures to make s'mores, leaving Susan behind. What Josh didn't know was that his 4-year-old son, with the detective across town, was telling a different story. After listing the family members who had gone camping, counting mom, dad, and brother, Charlie Powell changed the roll call when he asked who came back. Quote, "Mommy stayed where the crystals are." Josh Powell and Susan Cox first met at an LDS church singles mixer when she was 19 and he was 24. According to friends, Josh was a smug loudmouth, but Susan fell hard for him. She liked the way he took charge of the conversation and was unusually charmed by Josh's devotion to his pet bird, a parrot named Trilly that he took everywhere. As kids, Susan and her sister lovingly mothered a pair of bonded parakeets. Smitten, they married only a few months later. And by they, I mean Josh and Susan, not the parakeets. After a 2-year stay at Josh's father's house in Washington to save cash, the newlyweds moved to Utah and picked up steady work in stocks and IT. Susan's warmth quickly made her a neighborhood favorite, and friends learned to tolerate Josh. After a party one night, Susan confessed to a buddy she'd dreamed about being pregnant with a boy. Maybe Josh could be a good dad, the friend thought. Ironically, the next morning, 2 pink lines confirmed a child was on the way. While others softened to Josh, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, was not buying it. The day his daughter went into labor, Chuck remembers Josh waving him off as he played on one of his souped-up computers, refusing to drive his wife to the hospital. Susan, on the other hand, spent her childhood fantasizing about becoming a mom and was later thrilled to add a second son, Braden, to their growing family. The devoted mom dreaded her workday, but felt lucky to leave them in a daycare run by a close friend named Debbie. On the snowy morning of December 7th, Debbie Caldwell felt a pit of dread in her stomach when 6:30 a.m. came and went with no sign of the Powell boys. After all, Susan was the most punctual mom. Chalking it up to a slow commute on the heels of the blizzard, she dismissed her fears. By 9, she'd learned that neither Powell had reported for work that day. She called Josh's sister and rushed to the house. Debbie and Jennifer Graves arrived to find the home locked and eerily quiet. No tire or boot tracks in the snow. No movement within. Remembering that Susan had discussed repairing their broken furnace herself, the women called 911 in a panic, fearing carbon monoxide poisoning. Officers smashed a window and entered to find the house empty. No sign of forced entry, no theft of Josh's expensive electronics, no bodies. The only movement came from 2 box fans in the living room, directed at a wet spot on the rug and a couch that showed signs of being freshly cleaned. Josh's sister checked the bedroom and discovered Susan's purse abandoned on the dresser, her keys and wallet still inside. With more questions than answers, word spread fast. Friends and officers flooded the home. 9 hours after the 911 call, Josh pulled their blue minivan into the now-packed driveway, with Charlie and Braden in the back seat. He casually reported that the boys wanted to go camping, so he'd taken them to the desert west of Salt Lake City. He'd called Susan on his way back in and offered to pick her up from work, but she had not answered. Detectives escorted Josh and the boys to the precinct for an interview, but got little more than shrugs and complaints about the broken window. For investigators on site at the family home, however, a more sinister picture was developing. Microscopic drops of blood were discovered on the floor by the couch and box fans. An examination of the minivan uncovered Susan's pink cell phone buried deep in the center console and missing its SIM card. Josh's multiple hard drives were encrypted to the point no expert could crack them. With no Susan and no leads, friends began piecing it all together, small fragments of her reluctant confessions to them. Josh was controlling. He changed the PIN number to their joint account weekly. He'd hand over a spreadsheet of items on sale at different stores and a $10 bill to feed the kids for the week. He'd insisted that she knit her own socks and forced her to ride her bike to work every day. Meanwhile, Josh bought bags of junk food, electric cars, computer equipment, and inexplicably several 100 pounds of wheat. 9 days into the investigation, with little to show, police made the controversial decision to declare Josh a person of interest. Shortly after, he packed up the kids and fled to his father's home in Washington. And it wasn't long before the media latched on to the mysterious tale of a beautiful missing mother and her silent husband. Josh hid from cameras as her friends and family begged for her safe return, until one day, Josh came forward with a confession no one expected. Susan was troubled, he claimed, secretly promiscuous, broken by an angry mother and an abusive father. He built a Find Susan website and filled it with family photos and salacious accusations, namely that she'd fled to Brazil with a secret lover. Horrified, the Cox family hosted a televised press conference and detailed the emotional and physical abuse Susan suffered at Josh's hands. Callers flooded the tip lines. Most explosive was a call from Scott Hardman, an acquaintance who relayed a troubling conversation he'd had with Josh at a Christmas party. The secret to hiding a body, Josh insisted, was to dump it down a vertical mine shaft in the Utah desert. So unstable, virtually unsearchable, foolproof. Over the last decade, cops, cadaver dogs, and citizen detectives have dedicated tens of thousands of hours scouring Utah based on that one tip. Josh's morbid holiday proclamation may have been right. No signs of Susan have ever been found. With no body and no breaks in the case, cops made a desperate move, hoping Josh would snap. With animosity between Josh and his father-in-law worsening by the minute, police encouraged Chuck to host a honk and wave. Sure enough, as cameras rolled and Chuck held a sign with "Remember Me" emblazoned above Susan's photo, Josh and his father drove into the frame. A verbal altercation ensued, ending with Susan Powell boasting that he has proof of his daughter-in-law's instability at home in the form of her journals. That was just the slip police hoped for. They conducted a raid on Stephen's home and recovered boxes of personal diaries. Far more interesting, however, were the journals of Stephen himself. Pages and pages detailed how frequently he masturbated thinking about his daughter-in-law, how he worshipped her. A search of his closet revealed Ziploc baggies, labeled with dates and stuffed with her underwear, used cotton swabs, tampons. Thousands of photos, and many surveillance style, were mixed in with seductive magazine shots featuring Susan's head pasted on the model's body. Stephen couldn't be arrested for obsession, but the videos he'd recently taken of the underage neighbor girls bathing and using the toilet were a different story. Taken in on charges of child pornography and voyeurism, cops were sure he'd turn on his son. Stephen did not fold, but it gave the Cox family the ammo they needed to challenge Josh's custody of their grandchildren. A vicious court battle followed, hinging on disturbing details about Josh's violent childhood and the bombshell revelation that one of his PCs contained graphic pornography, featuring popular cartoon characters and incest fantasies. Pending results from a psychosexual evaluation, the judge limited Josh to supervised visitation. Days later, the boys raced into his home with their assigned social worker following behind. Josh stopped to make eye contact and smirked at the supervisor before slamming the door in her face, shouting to the boys about a surprise for them as he locked her out. The next sound was a child's scream. During the gut-wrenching 911 call that followed, the dispatcher dismissed the social worker's pleas for help as she listed off the address, gave Powell's estimated height, panicked as the smell of gas hit the air. Before hanging up, the operator told her deputies have to respond to emergency life-threatening situations first. Moments later, the home exploded, igniting an inferno that would push firefighters back for hours. While Josh could count on the silence of his father, the strength of his hard drive encryption, and the vast mysteries of the Utah desert, there were two liabilities he'd lost control of. He bashed Charlie and Braden repeatedly with the butt of an axe, drenched the house in gasoline, sat on the can, and lit the match. Josh burned alongside what could have become the most damning evidence of his crimes, his sons. That is 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. My name is Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for listening. If this is your first time listening to 10-Minute Murder, please subscribe now so that you can catch up on all the back episodes and never miss any of the new ones. Connect on social media, see the visuals of what we're talking about here in the podcast. And if you like this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple or any place that's possible. Your positive feedback is very much appreciated. All things related to 10-Minute Murder, you can go to 10minutemurder.com. And I don't know if you could tell, but about halfway through that episode, I took a sip of water, and one moment before I'm young and free and living La Vida Loca, and the next, my body forgets how to be a person. I nearly drowned myself, and thank God it was just tap water from a glass and not from a bottle, because you know how the local news would have tried to make it cute, like death by Dasani. Which is embarrassing because then people would think that I drink Dasani. All right, and our quick question for today comes from Mark in Michigan. And by the way, why are these questions almost never about true crime? I mean, I'm not complaining, but it's kind of weird. Okay. Hey, Joe, what gives you the ick? And I'll tell you, Mark, it's pretty simple. Being called hun. I can deal with honey, sugar, sweetie, but not hun. I don't know what it is about hun that bothers me so much. And especially being in the South, people are overly nice to you and affectionate. They'll give you those sappy nicknames. Like if you order some food through a drive-thru and they hand it back to you. Here you go, hun. No, just don't do that. All right, that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.